Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode.
Today we're talking about that wild moment of realization when you start to think, hang on, what if I'm actually neurodivergent?
Maybe you've watched a video, read a post, or seen a list of traits, and suddenly it's like someone handed you the missing chapter of your life.
That explains everything moment.
We're going to explore what happens next, the mix of relief, grief, anger, and self-compassion that can follow a late discovery or diagnosis.
And why it's never really too late to meet yourself properly, even if it can feel like you should have known sooner.
How do you feel about doing this episode?
How do I feel about doing this episode? Do you know what? I think I have got a hint of because I don't have a formal diagnosis. I think I don't even think about that anymore. I just think of that as perfectly valid. But there is a hint of me doing this episode that feels like, but I don't have a formal diagnosis. And maybe a recognition that there would be, if I do choose to get a formal diagnosis, a further process of processing. Yeah, different thoughts and feelings that might come up if it was to be confirmed by somebody else.
Do you think because we're recording this episode, is it bringing about any imposter syndrome?
That's what I'm surprised by, I think, because I did go through a process of, maybe you're just kidding yourself, or maybe you're just this or that or the other. But I feel fairly settled with it now, like almost to the point that most of the time I forget that formal diagnosis is even a thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm just so settled at kind of in my identity as being ADHD. But yeah, so it feels like a bit of a surprise to have just a little part of me kind of jumping up and going, but you haven't really got a diagnosis, have you? So yeah.
I think for the episode, that's going to be really useful for people who are going to really identify and relate, because we were able to bring your experience as somebody who is self-realised.
Yeah.
Versus myself, who has had a professional diagnosis. And is there a difference? Is there no difference whatsoever? I think it will be quite relatable for people on both sides for us to both be able to bring those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be a good balance, won't it?
Yes. For some reason, this feels like an elephant in the room. I think it's probably because of everything that's been going on in the media and news articles and things that's been written about the explosion in autism and ADHD diagnoses. And it's quite a hot topic at the moment. A lot of people are talking about it because they're self-realised or diagnosed. And also more people are talking about it from everybody's neurodivergent these days, just because they watch one TikTok video. So nowadays, creating an episode about it and talking about it, I'm just very much aware. There just feels like there's more eyes on this subject now.
Yeah. And I like that you clocked it from both sides as well, that there are more people that are realising, there are more people getting professional diagnoses. But also there are a lot more people talking about it that are sceptical. And yeah, just what that means for everybody. And yeah, I feel like I've got a few people in my head at different stages of recognising, realising, being diagnosed, waiting for diagnoses. Thankfully, I don't have too many people in my life that are very sceptical, which is nice, or at least they don't voice it to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have people in my life that is sceptical of my diagnosis. Potentially, not in a way that they have actively voiced, but because of comments about things in general, where I suspect that there could be skepticism. But I definitely see it more in the world in terms of more comments about people's skepticism. I don't even know whether to call it skepticism or lack of being informed,
Okay.
rather than skepticism. Yeah. But yes, it's more prevalent.
Yeah, I guess there's both. So I kind of had this recently. So I'm in a Facebook group called Drop the Disorder, which I've been in for a really long time because I don't work from the medical model when it comes to psychotherapy. So things like personality disorders, like I much prefer to think of in terms of, what has happened to somebody rather than what's wrong with somebody. But neurodivergence seems to, I don't even know if it causes a split or if I'm just recognizing that maybe I don't belong in that community anymore because there is lots of skepticism in there about that.
I've been the same. I've also followed Drop the Disorder and Mad in America, those
Yeah.
movements.
Hmm.
I do describe myself as being anti-pathologizing, also don't subscribe to the medical model and mental illness, preferring to look through the lens of what's happened to somebody. And I feel like once you explore and you get context, everything makes sense. Of course you would behave that way. Of course you would think that way. Of course you would feel that way.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't take away from the fact that it has a significant impact on people's life. But I haven't been convinced for a long time that the medical model is the way to deal with any mental health struggles. But you're right, there is then a conflict there when it comes to the neurodivergent side of things. I think I do still belong in those communities, but I can appreciate, and I'm not saying they can't, but I can sit with the nuance of knowing that there are some things that aren't helpful and can be really harmful from a labeling perspective.
Yeah.
And I think there are times when labeling can be really important and freeing and something that really helps people. So
Yeah.
I feel it's possible to both be anti-pathologizing and also feel that there are situations within which labels and diagnoses can be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like we could do a whole episode on this actually.
We probably should. Yeah. Let's
I
just
feel
jot
like
that
we
one
could.
down.
Yeah. Yeah. And so because I feel like we've kind of gone a bit ahead of ourselves and I'm like, oh wow, how have we gone into like anti-pathology and what is the medical model and all of that, when really what we were kind of originally aiming to talk about is diagnosis and the moment of realization and kind of exploring all of that. And
Let's
when I
bring it
think
back
about,
from that tangent.
yeah. What that takes me back to actually is probably our first online chat that we did, maybe as part of our pod coaching or maybe after that. And I could just
Mhm.
see myself sat in my old house having a chat with you. And I don't know who said first, I think probably you, saying about, oh yeah, I think I'm autistic, and me saying, oh yeah, me too. I just remember that moment of, oh, someone else. Yeah.
Oh, see, this is the moment where I hate my brain because it makes it seem like I don't care because I don't remember the first time
Oh
that we
yeah.
met and had that conversation. It
Yeah.
sounds lovely.
It was lovely. It was.
Glad I was there, that I experienced that. I don't remember it. Funnily
Mm.
enough, poor memory is a common trait.
Sure.
So,
But that's a
yeah.
while ago now. That would have been probably March or April 2022. So we're
How do you
talking
even
three,
know? How do
because I'm
you know the
autistic.
month and date? Yeah, I'm
Because I'm
autistic.
autistic. This is my dates and my flavor of autistic.
It is
So
not my
yeah.
flavor. I wish it was my flavor. It's not my flavor. But
Yeah.
this is also the point, isn't it? I understand maybe why some people can feel a bit skeptical because it doesn't look like any one thing. You put two
Yeah.
autistic people, two people with ADHD next to each other, and they could be so wildly opposite of one another. And I
Mhm.
think that is maybe why people struggle to get their head around it unless you've done your research and you understand that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So if we go back to that point, so kind of 2022, had you had either of your diagnoses at that point? I don't think you had. I think you were waiting for both.
It was my 3-year anniversary of being diagnosed this year. So and that was in a September. So if we met March, April time, it would
Mhm.
have been September of 2022. Yeah.
And was that autism?
Yes.
Yeah. And was your ADHD one after that?
Yes, I think it was maybe a year
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then I got diagnosed again as being autistic, which we can come to later.
Sure.
That was
Yeah.
about a year ago.
So when was the moment that you first started thinking, or when was it that you first started thinking, oh, I might be autistic?
So you'll have to bear with me because I can blab on about my story from point A to point B for ages. I first suspected, or should I say rather than suspected, the idea of, could I be autistic? Occurred to me when I was working as a nurse and I was working in CAMS, child and adolescent mental health services. I think I did an autism awareness training day, which in hindsight was actually terrible, especially considering I was doing the initial screening for potential autism. And that was when I look back on the training that I had, I was like, wow, that was really poor. But anyway, during the training, there was a very short section on how autism can present in young girls. And there was a few things in there that I was like, oh, okay. That made me think, oh, could I be autistic? So all I did was Google like autism, and I read on the NHS website what autism looks like. And it said things like struggling with imagination. And I was like, oh no, I'm highly imaginative. Struggling with empathy. And I was like, no, I have so much empathy. And so I saw like the top traits as listed on the NHS website, clocked it, thought, oh no, that's not me. And that was that. Then stumbled across the idea of being a highly sensitive person known as HSP, which is the work of Elaine Aron. I came across a TED talk that was talking about what it means to be a highly sensitive person in the world. And I immediately sent it to my mom and was like, this is us. And she watched it like, yes, this is us. And I bought the books and I did loads of research. And when I was reading all about it, it was like someone's written a book about me. So that was really helpful to come across because it started to help me understand myself through a lens that recognized how I can feel different from other people and act in a way that sometimes feels out of step with the way that other people might see things in the world. And I essentially came to just identify as knowing, oh no, I'm just a highly sensitive person. And that was the case for a number of years. Then COVID and the lockdowns happened. And when the lockdowns happened, and I always feel really weird saying this because it was a really traumatic time, lots of awful stuff was happening, but the lockdowns were weirdly such a gift. Everything was quieter, demands were less, lots of people weren't working. I could go out for a walk on the street and it'd be silent, no hum of cars in the background. I mean, I live in a small, quiet village anyway, but a main A road's not too far away, just always that hum. And it was gone. And it was just absolute bliss. And more people would be around because they weren't working. And you'd be like, oh, hello, good morning from your distance that you were supposed to. The demands for socializing weren't, well, either you couldn't socialize at all, or then it was quite limited. There were loads of things, but lots of things that made me realize, wow, this quieter, slowed down way of life, I felt great. And when it started to end, I felt like everyone around me was like, woohoo, we can get back out there. Let's get things back to normal. And I was sad. I went through a real grieving period about it ending. To this day, if I was to really allow myself to connect with what it was like then, I would genuinely start to get upset. I felt like that's what the world should be like. So I really struggled when everything started to get back to normal. I still hadn't clocked, could this be related to being autistic? But the next thing that set me on the journey was, and I feel so ignorant when I say this, knowing what I know now, so bear with me if you're listening, but somebody had put a post in a therapist Facebook group about being an autistic therapist, something in relation to that. And I saw that and I thought, just so conscious of how this shows my ignorance. But I was like, if you're autistic and you struggle with empathy, how on earth could you possibly be a therapist? I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And it just so happened in the comments, something had been said, I can't remember what, but somebody had said, oh, you need to specifically go away and look up autism in women and girls. So I did. And then when I wasn't just reading the standard NHS information and I dug a little bit deeper and I got other information, then it was like, ding, 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 ding. Oh, this fits. This really fits. There was some skepticism in myself. On the one hand, it's, oh, this really fits. And the next, no, it can't possibly be. So it wasn't as straightforward as I just made it out to be. But that is what started me on the journey.
Yeah.
Listening to my journey, how does that compare to yours?
Very different, I think. And you have to bear with me because my brain is sort of on the pandemic bit, because I simultaneously had the loving the change because it was very different. There were very different demands, but also I was suddenly at home with 5 children, including 3 under 5. So I had a very different experience, but I can also still relate to the reduction in demands and the pace of life feeling in some ways just more manageable. So yeah, I definitely had that. So with hindsight, I think I started to have wonderings when my eldest child was diagnosed. So they were diagnosed when they were 9. They were originally assessed when they were 6, but there was a pretty rubbish process. There ended up being a locum doctor involved, and we were told not, even though now it's like, obviously. So, yeah, so they were diagnosed when they were 9. And I think I struggled with that quite a lot because I was looking at, some of the things on the list and was like, and I can't remember what things now. It wouldn't have been empathy. I can't think off the top of my head, but as we were working through maybe some questionnaires that we were given or whatever, I was just thinking, but that's normal. Yeah, but that's normal, isn't it? Yeah, but everybody does that, don't they?
Hmm.
um, and now, whenever anyone reads anything about autism and ADHD and says, but everyone does that, don't they? I'm like, right, yeah, 6 months till you realise that you are.
Can
I
I
don't.
just jump in there? Because it
Yeah,
just feels like a good moment to make that point.
yeah,
When people say, but everybody does that, it does make me laugh because there are people that are relating to everything. And you're thinking, yeah, there's a reason that you're
yeah,
relating to
yeah,
everything.
yeah,
And also, people need to realize that autistic traits, ADHD traits are human traits.
yeah.
They're not just these wild, weird traits that you're not going to relate to if you're not autistic or ADHD. They are human traits. Everybody will do them to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah.
That does not mean everybody is a little bit autistic or ADHD. That just means
Mhm.
everybody's human.
Yes.
However, if you relate a lot to multiple things consistently over your life and in different areas of your life,
Yeah.
then there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah. 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 That's very well put. I don't actually remember when I came back around to the idea. I can't actually.
So, when your daughter was
Mm,
diagnosed, age 9, you didn't think
Yeah.
about yourself at that point, or did you? Because that's really common, isn't it, for people to
Yeah.
realize they are after their children are
Yeah,
diagnosed?
it wasn't that soon after. It wasn't that soon after. I feel like I've got a big gap in my brain actually between that and then that call that we had. But I must have already been thinking about it because I'm sure I'd already written the letter to the GP that I've never sent. I don't know. I don't know if it had just kind of come back around into not even come back around, or if it was just coming more into awareness.
Mm.
Don't know. Good question. Yeah, I don't even actually know. I can't even remember now how I started to realize that it would be the case for me. I suspect, similarly to you, that there was a degree of the awareness around how autism presents in women and girls. And I also struggle a bit with it being framed in that way because I have 2 autistic children, possibly more, awaiting diagnoses. And they present very differently. And I came across a guy who preferred to call it autism type 2 or something like that instead of separating it into male and female.
Yeah,
Because
instead of gendering it.
yeah, because some men and boys also present in a way that has been positioned as how it shows up in women and girls. And I
Hmm.
can see that causing kind of more issues.
I think that's a good point because people do talk about it as in male presenting autism, female presenting autism. And I don't think that it is specific. I think it can look differently no matter your gender.
Yeah.
But I also understand that at this time, that's
Yeah.
largely how it's being spoken about and
Yeah.
can be helpful for people to understand how it can present so differently. And unfortunately, that might mean a man or somebody who's assigned male at birth might want to go and look at
Yeah.
how autism can present in women because that might fit for
Yes.
themselves. But
Yes.
I agree that we at some point need to find a different terminology for that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That there are just different ways that it can present. And there can be, if you're just looking for those stereotypical traits, you're going to miss a whole load of other people and how it presents for them.
Yeah. I think the best way to look at it is being autistic usually comes down to being one of an extreme. So, neurotypical, people who aren't autistic, aren't ADHD, often hover around in the middle area in terms of the human experience, sometimes going a bit more to one side, a bit more to the other, whereas autistic people tend to be more in the polar opposites and shift between the extremes. So it is true that someone might struggle with empathy or might not struggle with empathy, but display it in a different way.
Yeah.
Versus other people might have hyper empathy in a way which, I mean, that sounds like a lovely thing, but it can actually also cause a lot of problems. And gosh, we could list many more examples, but essentially it can be helpful to know rather than it being about male presenting, female presenting, there are different extremes and you might not fit in one, but you might fit in the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you had the realization that you were probably autistic before you, I guess even before you got your diagnosis, like for you, did it feel like a relief to be realizing something, or did it feel difficult to be realizing that, or how was that for you to have that realization?
Mental torture. I was in
Okay.
turmoil.
Yeah.
It was really difficult because there was that whole aha moment of, oh my gosh, this really fits. But then came the whole internal conflict and battle over, but is it true? Is it not true? Am I just making it up? Am I trying to appropriate something? Am I taking something away from someone else by thinking that I might be autistic? So there was a real battle I did, which is actually a very autistic thing. I went down a research rabbit hole for about a year where my every single waking day was taken up by watching videos,
Mhm.
reading books, listening to podcasts, reading research, anything basically that I could get my hands on around what it means to be autistic, the diagnostic criteria, and whether or not that would fit for me. The reason that I was doing that was to try to figure out, am I autistic? A lot of my efforts were about just trying to self identify, self realize, self diagnose, whatever terminology you want to use. At the time, I'd read a lot about the pros and cons of getting a diagnosis. Going for an assessment sounded scary. So I wanted to try to figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
But after a year of solid research and because of so much self doubt, over analyzing, thinking about it so deeply, imposter syndrome, all of those things, I couldn't land anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, I find some people are able to land on knowing that they are and they don't need to pursue that diagnosis, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I am somebody that needs to know the right answer.
Mhm.
I need to know, and I need you, the professional who is trained in this, to tell me because it got to the point where I couldn't tell myself.
Yeah.
So that was when I decided to pay privately because there was no way I could live with the turmoil of back and forth in my head for however many years it would take on the NHS.
Yeah.
I had a private assessment and was terrified about the whole thing, but it was a 3.5 hour interview that I did and ultimately came out with a diagnosis of autism. I was also assessed at the same time for ADHD. I was doubtful about the ADHD, and the assessor was not sure about ADHD. They said that they were on the fence. They
Right.
said I could be, but they weren't confident enough to give me that diagnosis. And I was not sure either. I'd never considered the possibility that I could be ADHD. Nobody who knows me would say, you're well ADHD, you are like,
Right.
that wouldn't even come up in people's minds. So I didn't really think that was likely to be the case. I have since gone on to get an ADHD diagnosis, but
Yeah.
we'll talk about that. Yeah, so I got the diagnosis of being autistic. And the diagnosis was also difficult, and it's not been something I've just gone and embraced.
Hmm.
Lots of people online seem to, well, the impression I get is people get a diagnosis and some people get like congrats on your autism
Mhm.
cakes and things like that,
Mm.
where people finally, oh, finally something that makes sense. And it feels like a largely positive thing.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it is a positive thing, but it's been hard to get there. It's not been easy. I didn't just get the diagnosis and then everything made sense and everything was lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
tricky.
I think it's really common to have a mixed experience, to have a mixed feeling afterwards. Certainly most of the people that I speak to have very mixed feelings upon realization or diagnosis or both. I know certainly for me, I went through a phase of there is that sense of relief of realizing like all this time, all of this struggle, like this is what's been going on. Like it makes sense. But also then being faced with a future of I'm always going to be autistic. I can't, especially as a therapist, having been in therapy for a while myself, I can't therapy my way out of this. That this is going to impact my life for the rest of my life. And I'm in a much different place with it now. There are frustrations that I have with it, but I feel on the whole, like if somebody said, we've produced a pill and we can get rid of your autism, no way would I take it.
Hmm.
No way.
Yeah,
I
I
just
wouldn't
wouldn't.
either.
I can't even comprehend who I would be without it. It's not something that I would want to get rid of. It's something that I
No.
deeply value in myself. I don't view it through the lens of, we said before about the medical model. I don't view it through a lens of pathology. I don't think of myself as having ASD. Think of
Hmm.
myself as being autistic. They feel like quite different things in my mind.
Yeah. But I can understand why some people would want to take the
Yeah.
pill or
Hmm.
be tempted to
Yeah.
take the pill. And I
Yeah.
want to recognize that everybody's experiences and difficulties
Yeah.
are different. And for some people are much more
Yeah.
severe and disabling and impacting everyday life. So I want to recognize that as
Hmm.
well. But I am the same. For me personally, I wouldn't take that pill.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I'm in a very different place now. But I know in the past there was a real grieving process. And I think like with grieving other things that's never done, it's, there's always more to it as different life experiences come up. But on the whole, I don't feel like I'm in a place of grieving it anymore. I feel settled with this is who I am and this is how I am. And I will find some way for my life to be able to kind of shape my life in a way that works for me.
Hmm.
I'm also like sat with the fact that the last 6 to 8 weeks have just been brutal. I think because there's been so much change and that has been really hard. And there probably were points in the last 8 weeks where I would have taken the pill just to get through a bit easier. But yeah, I
Can
feel like I'm in a much more settled place with it now.
Can I ask for others who have self-identified or are trying to figure out how to? Did it reach a point where you felt like you claimed that label for yourself? Like, was there any one moment where it was like, okay, I am this? Or did it steadily creep up on you?
Yeah. I think it's been a steadily creep up moment. So one thing that I've had in my head as we've been talking is there was definitely a point where you had your diagnosis, and I must have been in my backwards and forwards about whether I'll get a diagnosis, which I still am in sometimes for various reasons. But I remember you saying about just because you've got the diagnosis, the backwards and forwards doesn't necessarily go away, that there
Hmm.
can still be a period of backwards and forward. And I think there was something in that just made me feel like maybe it's not going to give me what I want. I think some of it is about my uh, just the way I view diagnosis in general, that I do take a very strong view that I know myself better than anybody else could, that someone else absolutely, and maybe this will upset some people that are listening, but have studied very hard, don't want to take that away from them and be able to diagnose formally. But I don't, I just think for me understanding what autism is and matching how I am to what autism is and knowing that there's enough of a match there, I'm comfortable enough with this is what it is. I think it's almost the opposite. Like if I went for an assessment and somebody said to me, "You're not autistic," I would be like, "You definitely got that wrong," because I definitely am. Um,
Yes.
so I feel like where I've still got some should I apply is more around. So I've just started my master's degree. I can only get disabled student allowance. Is that what it's called?
Mm.
Um, if I have a formal diagnosis. So I don't want a formal diagnosis, but some of the support that I would benefit from is behind a gate that I can't get to without having a formal diagnosis. So I may
Yes.
comply to get the support.
Well, it's a shame that you have to do that.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
shame that it's gatekept behind a diagnosis, especially because if you don't have the privilege of being able to go private, well, you could be waiting years.
Right. Yeah. I don't understand how that can be ethical at all. And obviously, there are funding limits. And I guess this is one way that they limit the budget. But with the waiting lists the way they are, yeah, I can't really understand how that is justifiable. Uh,
No. I'm glad that you brought up, though, because that reminded me how one of the reasons I went for an assessment is because of the back and forth, and I just wanted the answer.
yeah.
Yeah, so I say this to people all the time that are talking about potentially getting assessed. It didn't actually fully settle it in my mind because even when I got the diagnosis, I didn't just go, oh, okay, then. I still constantly questioned, but did they get it right? What if they got it wrong? What if I've just read so much about it that I unconsciously tailored my answers to sound like I'm autistic? What if I just convinced them? All sorts of things. So the constant questioning went back and forth. And I used to joke about wanting to go and have 2 more assessments so that it had statistical significance. So that
Yeah.
if 3 of them or 2 out of the 3 said, yeah, then oh, maybe now I can accept it. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's important to say that an assessment for everybody doesn't necessarily mean that you now just suddenly know and accept it.
No. Where are you at with that now? Because that was a while ago. That would have been 2023, I think, that we had that conversation.
I would say I'm pretty much accepting of knowing that I am, but there can still be doubts that come in at times. And the reason that there are doubts is because I can have brief moments in time when everything kind of feels okay. And in those moments where everything kind of feels okay and on an even keel and there's not too much going on and I'm doing okay mentally, in those moments, I'm like, I'm not autistic. What was I thinking? What
Mm.
were the 2 people that diagnosed and assessed me? What were they thinking? The difficulty is, and I want to be really clear when I say this, that this isn't as straightforward as what I mean. When you're not doing so great, you become more autistic. But
Mm.
can I be clear? You don't actually become more autistic, you're autistic. What I
Yeah.
mean by that is your traits can heighten, it can become more evident. Need for control and rigidity and sameness,
Mhm.
your tolerance for change, those kinds of things can increase. And so you can seem, doing air quotes, more
Yeah.
autistic.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, I'm like, I'm definitely autistic. But things settle and aren't so apparent and aren't so obvious. That's sometimes when the doubt can come in. But you and I talk about how when you look at the diagnostic criteria for autism, and I've heard a lot more people saying this now, that the diagnostic criteria for autism represents an autistic person in distress, an
Yeah. I'm
autistic
glad.
person whose needs aren't being met. And
Yeah.
you've said that to me several times. And I'm like, yep, totally,
Yeah.
totally true. And so when things aren't doing too bad and you might not even fully meet the criteria, you would, but not as obvious as when things aren't going great.
Yeah.
But I think that's why a lot of late diagnosed adults have been diagnosed during a point of crisis
Yes.
in their
Yeah.
life.
Mhm.
But if you go for an assessment and you're seen as largely doing well, they'll say, well, you don't meet the criteria because it's not having a significant impact and impairment on your life. But
Yeah.
you absolutely could still be autistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up because I do believe that just so strongly in my body that the diagnostic criteria show an autistic person that is in distress. And I think that's why we also have a lot of crossover about like, is it autism or is it trauma?
Mhm.
That most of the time it's both, that I don't actually think it's possible to be raised in our society if you're autistic without being traumatized. I just don't think it's possible. I think the inherent sensitivity that comes with being autistic just means that you will be traumatized.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So what about ADHD? Tell me about
Yeah.
your story to realizing you're ADHD, autistic and ADHD.
Yeah. So again, I'm not really so clear about this. So someone else in my life was diagnosed. At that point, I did have that real like, oh, if that's what's going on for them, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on for me as well. And I feel like it's a bit more obvious for me. Like I'm such a messy person. I don't know how I do it. Like I can tidy up a space and then I'll turn around and there'll just be a trail of destruction around me.
Like all the cupboard doors left open.
Yeah, just got absolutely no idea. And I think for a long time I'd had a sense that there was an issue, but I didn't really have any language to put to that issue, except that my mum would be desperate for me to tidy up, whether that was my bedroom at home or my house after I'd left home. And I just couldn't do it. I just could not tidy up. I don't know if you've seen the recent Chris Packham program about ADHD, and there's a guy on there and he's got a really messy room, and like, that is me. Like, I wanted to cry when I watched that episode because that is so me. And it's like the only way I could ever describe it to my mum is like, I've just got a block in my brain and I just can't do it.
Which is hard for other people to understand.
Yeah, I think if you don't have it, I just don't think they'd really know what you're talking about. But it's distressing for me. I don't want to be messy. It's stressful for me living in a messy space. It carries a lot of shame, particularly as a woman. Most women will bond over being the one that keeps the house tidy, and it's me that leaves my wet towel on the floor. you know So yeah, that is problematic. But then also I went to my mum's house a few years ago, and for some reason she had my school reports out, and just over and over again was lax organisation, messy presentation, lax organisation, just over and over, year after year. And I was stunned reading those back because I hadn't been, as far as I knew, I was like gold star girl, perfect school reports. So I was really kind of surprised to read that, even though I knew, back then I'd constantly be losing things, forgetting things. Yeah, it's just so obvious to me with hindsight that is what's going on. I think actually that side of things causes me more distress, and possibly because there's more shame for me around that than
Right.
the autism.
I think I'd agree actually for myself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'd be really interested to know actually yeah. I think because women in society are positioned as the ones that have it all together, if you're ADHD and that interrupts with that, like, how does that impact you? So yeah, and I think I feel like I have struggled more with ADHD, and I know it's really a contentious thing to suggest that ADHD is the result of trauma. But I find it much harder to separate out what is ADHD and what is trauma. I feel like
And
even
what's
now,
both?
yeah, and I read something recently where somebody was saying like there is definite brain difference in ADHD, and then I read things from other people that I respect saying there is no known genetic brain difference or gene difference, and I know that there are really intense camps
hmm
when it comes to this, and I feel really uncomfortable about that. But for myself, I don't really care. I don't really care if it's a genetic thing or a brain difference thing, or if it's an acquired thing. I'm not really bothered anymore.
Mm.
It's the focus for me is more around this is how it is and this is how it's presenting. So what do I need now to be able to move forward?
Yeah.
So I've probably just upset both camps there in one go. So how was it for you then with ADHD? How did you start to suspect that that might be something that was going on for you?
When I was in my research autism deep dive, I was coming across people who were talking about what it's like to live with being autistic and ADHD
Mhm.
or DHD. And that was starting to really describe my experience. So when I would consume content or videos from, say, ADHD content creators, at the time I would watch a lot of YouTube videos from neurodivergent content creators. And when I would watch the ones that were purely about ADHD, I'd relate, but I wouldn't relate fully. So then I'd come back to, so maybe I don't have ADHD.
Yeah.
And it was a similar thing with autism as well. I'd say there was a lot more with autism than I related to. But again, there would still be things that would come up that I'd be like, well, that's not me. And yes, I know that there's a big difference between how people can present, but it still felt like being solely autistic or solely ADHD didn't fully fit my experience. But when I would listen to people talk about what it means to live with ADHD,
Mhm.
that seemed to fit my experience.
Yeah.
which was confusing because, as I say, I never would have considered ADHD. People who know me would never say ADHD. I'm not someone who's always on the go, driven by a motor. I'm not someone who overshares and blurts out things inappropriately. I'm not somebody who you would describe as being impulsive and hyperactive, which
Mhm.
seems strange to say when you're thinking, but Carly, you're describing the diagnostic criteria for ADHD.
Yeah. So how does it
Um,
show up for you then?
well, I started to realize that it shows up very differently. So, take the hyperactivity, for example. My physical body is not driven by a motor and is not on the go all the time, but my mind is on the go all the time and rarely stops. Can experience some break, which is probably because I'm ADHD, whereas ADHDers will say they literally get zero break. But my mind is on the go all of the time. So, even if I'm lying on the sofa and my body is resting, I may have, in that time period, gone down various research rabbit holes, decided that I want to move to Spain, done all of the research about what I would need to get a visa and exactly what that would entail and what the house property prices are in this specific area and what jobs are available. I would have done all of that sort of stuff. The other side of it is in my 10-year nursing career, I had 11 different nursing jobs within the 10 years. So that, that works out as not hardly even staying in a whole year in a job. So I have job switched a lot, which is another quite common experience that ADHDers have. I do need to be challenged. I need to be stimulated. I've been to university 3 times.
Mhm.
So the constant need for newness and novelty and doing new things is how it can show up for me. And the executive dysfunctioning part, which for those that don't know, it encompasses loads of different things, but related to your working memory not being very good, struggling with to get tasks started, struggling to see tasks through, time management, those kinds of things, plus many others. They're the kinds of things I struggle with. So I would describe myself as being autistic dominant with a sprinkling of ADHD on the top. So I
Mhm.
do think I'm predominantly autistic.
Okay.
The other thing that's important for people to know is if you are both at different times, the different traits can mask one another. So sometimes it's not always obvious. But just one great piece of evidence for me is so I have a filing cabinet over there. If you were to look in it, you would see an extremely well organized filing cabinet for all of my paperwork, each with individual labels, each with a little logo on that represents a visual picture for what goes in that specific folder and color coordinated. And so I know where absolutely everything is. So my paperwork system is organized to the nth degree, autistic part. The idea being that if you get a letter come through, you read it, you can file it straight away in the appropriate place and it's dead easy to find for when you need it. ADHD part gets the paper, leaves it on the side, stays there for days. The blindness comes in where I now can't even see that it's there and it needs anything doing with it. Another letter comes in, same thing, same thing. So I have this amazingly organized system and a pile of papers that gather into a humongous pile that don't ever actually get filed in the super organized system. And papers just end up everywhere. And I feel like to me, that's ADHD. And I know that sounds very simple. If you do that, it doesn't mean you're ADHD.
Yeah.
Um, but that to me just kind of sums it up in a neat little analogy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a brilliant, brilliant analogy. And actually, I was thinking about that my struggle with being messy is also that, is that there's stuff everywhere. So one, the autistic part of me has an aversion to like, that is too chaotic, take me away. But also that if I'm going to tidy it up, I've got to tidy it up properly and everything's got to go exactly where it belongs. And not everything has even got a home. And actually, I don't even know how to categorize all of these different things. So then I'm just like, yeah, I can't. I can't.
Not too, yeah. Yeah. But once I realized, no, autism and ADHD better fits my experience than autism alone or ADHD alone, that's when I decided to go
Mm.
again for an ADHD assessment because the first assessor was on the fence. So it wasn't a no,
Right.
but it wasn't a yes. And so I decided, again, need to know. So I went and had an assessment and I did get a diagnosis. And the reason I've been diagnosed as being autistic twice is because when I went for my private one, I'd previously put in for an NHS assessment and got put on a waiting list, found out how long it was, and then I decided to go private, but it didn't remove myself off the waiting list. So 2.5, 3 years later, an offer for an appointment comes through for an assessment. at which point I debate, oh, do I go? Do I take it? Do I not take it? Do I find out and be sure? What if I go and they say you're not? Like, oh my God, I've been living as an autistic person for the last couple of years. But ultimately, I did decide to go. I was intrigued to know what an NHS assessment would look like next to a private assessment. I know they all do it differently, but I thought it would help me to know both personally and professionally what it's like to go through both of those processes. So I did, and I'd actually say that was less thorough. Well, it was less thorough than my private one. They said autism, and actually it wasn't an ADHD assessment, but the assessor did say like, oh yeah, you're definitely both. So
Right.
I almost took it as a secondary confirmation of that as well.
Yeah.
But that's how I ended up with multiple, being told multiple, and yet I still doubt it. Make that make sense. I still doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about our own journeys to realizing that we're neurodivergent, that we are autistic, and that we live with ADHD. And there are a lot of people who think that there's this big, massive overdiagnosis going on. And it's a bit difficult, I find, to live in a world where then people are then starting to be skeptical if you've got that label. I've seen this come up a few times on social media, but I really like it as a way to explain this myth of overdiagnosis. I don't know who originally said it to credit, but it pops up a lot. And it uses the example of how not all that long ago, children who were left-handed were forced to learn how to be right-handed.
Yeah.
And so the number of people in the world who were right-handed was very high. When that went away and people were just allowed to be left-handed, suddenly the number of people who are left-handed obviously rose like really sharply.
Yeah.
And it's been used as a good analogy for why there aren't suddenly being more autistic people in the world or people with ADHD. There isn't this so-called over-diagnosis. It's just there's more awareness now.
Yeah.
And people are able to realize these things about themselves, go and have assessments or do a lot of research. I don't believe that anybody diagnoses themselves from a few TikTok videos. I just don't.
No.
I'm not saying that there's no problem with some of the content that's put out. They're often like 30, 60-second reels. So it is difficult to understand and experience through that.
Yeah.
But I've never met anyone who's just one day come across a video and decided that they're now autistic or ADHD.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I saw a study a few days ago, actually, and you have to forgive me. I don't know where I saw it or who it was by. It's not that helpful. But it was about it was comparing self-diagnosis and formal diagnosis.
Right.
And I think it was to do with the accuracy of self-realization, and basically showed that it was kind of the same.
Oh, okay.
That
That's
most people,
interesting.
yeah, that the kind of the prevalence of it. I don't know. I've not got it in front of me, so I don't remember the words exactly. But yeah, that it was that it was kind of the same. And yeah, I just think it would be a strange thing to do to decide. I can't see how you would come to the conclusion that you were autistic. And I think, like you say, most people put a lot of thought into it. Like even me, like I'm not someone that's done masses of research into it. I'm not that kind of person. But I have spent hours thinking about it and reflecting on it, and yeah, and have read up about it, and it's been a years long process. It's not a sudden like, oh yeah, I'll just be that. And I don't know, I suppose I'm kind of thinking about myself as a teenager, but I can't even do that because I know that I am autistic. Like if I'd have had TikTok back then, would I have been like, oh, that's me? But I would have been right. Yeah, I just am not worried at all or concerned about. Like, it makes me feel sad when people talk about jumping on the bandwagon. And I feel like people say that both from a skeptical place or, a little informed place. But I feel like people also say it about themselves if they're considering a diagnosis of like, oh, am
Mhm.
I just jumping on the bandwagon? And that always makes me feel sad because of the amount of distress that they've been through or the impact that this is having on their lives. And I think it is important to think about, and I think there is a lot of unhelpful content out there, particularly around the idea of things being fixed or like, maybe I'm going a bit against what I said earlier. Like, I don't, and I think it's one of the problems that I have with labels in general is that if somebody labels themselves as something, they can then become stuck in their growth because
Mhm.
they'll just I don't want to say fall back on because that just sounds unfair. But I think it can limit growth if people incorrectly believe that just because you're this thing doesn't mean you can grow or change or get adjustments or accommodations in your life that will help you to do things that you want to do. So I think there is something about that. But I think there is also a very unsavory political process going on behind all of this
Hmm.
that is not based in fact, that is
Yeah.
just clickbait, that is not helpful.
I think on the labels perspective, so many people talk about the fact that they've already been handed a load of labels. If you've been
Yeah.
handed a label of weird,
Yeah.
lazy,
Yeah. Awkward, difficult.
yeah,
Mm.
not sociable. There are so many labels that people already have heard and internalized.
Yeah.
Whereas if you strip all those labels away and just offer that one,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if there's support afterwards to then not get stuck in the
Yeah.
diagnostic box
Yeah.
that you fit
Yeah.
into, it isn't great to put people in boxes as such,
Hmm.
but you can still have a label and the walls of those boxes come down. I
Hmm.
went through a whole phase where I was thinking, do I even have a personality? Like, am I just made up of autistic traits? Where do these traits end and where does Carly begin? This is why I said like mental turmoil earlier, because it has both been a really positive experience and a negative experience. And there's
Yeah.
been a lot that I've had to work through and figure out in the negative side.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's a positive thing overall. It's just, I have found it a very difficult process to go through, but
Mm.
ultimately worth it.
Yeah. I've gone back to thinking about the explosion of people realizing, and actually what I noticed when people realize that they're autistic or have ADHD is they start to recognize it in their parents,
Hmm.
and that nobody kind of identified it with those words before, but that it had always been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
definitely.
I feel like we've got so much more that we can talk about with this.
I could
Um,
have 10 episodes just on this
yeah.
subject. I'm left feeling with a sense of I've just given a tiny sprinkling
Yeah.
of it, and there's a lot more that we could say and talk about. But also there will be a lot of people listening who don't relate to what we're talking about, doesn't apply to them. But I
Mhm.
hope is still helpful to have listened to from supporting other people in your
Yeah.
life or just increasing your understanding and awareness.
Yeah.
There may be people listening who, like me, really related to being HSB
Yeah.
and maybe have considered the possibility that it could be more than that. But ultimately, if this is something that you have ever thought about for yourself, it's important that you get your information from the right place. Or, like me, you could easily think, oh no, that doesn't apply to me, when it might. Just know there's nothing wrong with exploring that. You can explore it and decide, actually, I don't think this does fit.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But if you've ever thought about it, there's a popular phrase that says neurotypical people don't go around wondering if they're
Yeah.
neurodivergent. So if
Mhm.
you're thinking about it, there's
Yeah.
going to be a reason why. And it doesn't mean that this will fit for you.
Yeah.
That could be explained by something else, but it
Mhm.
does mean that it's worth looking into, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have some preferred sources of support? Because obviously, what you said is that where you went to was the NHS. Obviously, that would be the ideal place for people to go. I don't know what their resources are like at this point. Are there particular places that you would send people to have a think about to get good information, reliable information?
I think YouTube is a really great source because there are a lot of psychiatrists, clinical psychologists talking openly about diagnosis in a way that's more modern. There are a lot of really great books out there now. I can read a few off my shelf behind me. Devon Price, Unmasking Autism. There is a book by Ellie Middleton, Unmasked. I think she has a new one out as well. Also, if you follow her on social media, she does a lot of really great content. There are books by autistic people themselves. There are loads. There's one called Drama Queen, one by the comedian Fern Brady that I really enjoyed. And then there are autistic and ADHD content creators. So from an ADHD perspective, there's Jessica McCabe, I think you say it. She has a book called How to ADHD, which I'd recommend. Autistic content creators, there's Mom, American, Mom on the Spectrum. There's Yo Samdy Sam. There's Inside Autism. And another thing that I found really helpful, if you just Google it, is Samantha Craft's Asperger's in Girls checklist is what it was originally called. So I would search it under those terms. It's not a diagnostic checklist, but it's a helpful checklist about different ways that the traits can show up in ways that you may not have thought about before. If you just read the diagnostic criteria, I think you're unlikely to read that and say that's me, because you don't know what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yo Samdi Sam has a really good YouTube video where she talks through the diagnostic criteria for autism and talks about it in a real world sense that I found really helpful. I'm pretty sure it was Yo Samdi Sam who did that.
Yeah, she has a guide as well. I can't remember what it's called, but you'd find it pretty easily if you search for her. Yeah, there's just a few suggestions.
Yeah. I'm thinking that would make a really good carousel for our Instagram. So if people are listening and want to know what the resources are, then perhaps we can make a note and just whack some of that into a carousel for people to have access to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the one that I would add on is the Embrace screening test.
Yes.
They have quite a few screening tests. So they have the AQ50 that is the main one, but then they also have some more that help to catch traits that might be missed by the usual screening test.
Yes, so that one is embraceautism.com.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that'll be a good place to bring it to a close for today, because we definitely do have so much more to say. If you've had that late realization or diagnosis, it's okay if it's messy. Relief and grief can exist together.
You haven't wasted time. You spent years surviving in a world that didn't speak your language, and now you finally found the translation.
So this week, maybe notice the ways you understand yourself differently now and what that understanding lets you forgive.
Next time, we're talking about being too autistic to be a therapist. We're unpacking the myth that autistic people lack empathy and why neurodivergent therapists might just understand you best.
But for now, we'll leave you with this question. If you've been quietly wondering whether you might be neurodivergent, what would it feel like to let go of the fear of being wrong or making it up, and instead give yourself permission to explore it with compassion? That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.